Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to this deep dive into the life of Malcolm X.
Malcolm X.
Yeah, we're going to explore his journey, especially like his impact on the civil rights movement.
Yeah,
You know, he wasn't just a historical figure. He was like a powerful force for change,
absolutely.
challenged the norms and fought for Black empowerment in a way that we're still talking about it today.
Right. And I think
Yeah.
the sources we have really give a nuanced look at someone who wasn't afraid to question conventions, and push for this distinct vision of Black empowerment.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what I found so fascinating when I was looking through the sources
Yeah.
was that he was constantly evolving. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He wasn't afraid to kind of rethink his positions.
Yeah, and what's so fascinating is that this life is intertwined with one of the most turbulent periods in American history.
Oh, absolutely.
So you get this really unique perspective on the fight for racial justice just by looking at one man's story.
Exactly. And so, when I was looking through these sources, I was really struck by how much his early life really seemed to shape his worldview.
Yeah.
We're talking about a childhood marked by hardship and racial violence.
Yeah.
The kind of experiences that I think just leave an undeniable mark on a person.
Absolutely.
His father's murder by white supremacists,
Yeah.
the struggle of poverty, the ever-present reality of systemic racism.
Right.
It all adds up,
And it's crucial to understand that these early traumas, they don't just disappear.
Right.
They fueled his activism, and it's a kind of a sad story in a way that as a teenager, he turned to crime,
Right.
ended up in prison, but then that wasn't the end. That was kind of a turning point
Right.
because it's during this time that he's introduced to the Nation of Islam,
Right.
and that encounter really changes everything.
Okay, so that's where it gets really interesting. So tell me, what were the core teachings of the Nation of Islam, and why did they resonate so deeply with Malcolm X at that point in his life?
So the NOI, as it was known, had a very particular view of race relations in America. They promoted the idea that the white man is the devil,
Wow.
a concept that, given his experiences, Malcolm X found deeply resonant.
Okay, so that's obviously a powerful and controversial statement.
Right.
Can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Yeah.
Help us understand that statement in the context of both Malcolm X's personal experience, but also the broader historical context of the time.
Yeah, you have to remember, this was a time when the civil rights movement was gaining momentum, but Black Americans are still facing immense oppression and violence.
Right.
So this idea, it resonated with many because it provided an explanation for the suffering that they endured.
Right.
It also offered an alternative to the idea of integration, which some saw as assimilation into a system that consistently oppressed them.
Right. And it was around this time that Malcolm X takes on this symbolic X to replace his last name.
Right.
Right. A powerful kind of rejection of the identity that was imposed by slavery and a reclaiming of his lost African heritage.
Precisely, that name change was more than just a symbolic gesture.
Yeah.
It was a declaration of self-determination,
Right.
a way of saying, I will not be defined by the legacy of oppression. I will choose my own identity.
So we see this young man deeply affected by his experiences, finding a sense of purpose and identity within the Nation of Islam.
Yes.
What happens next in this incredible story?
So his rise within the NOI after his release from prison in 1952 was meteoric.
Wow.
He quickly becomes a key figure in the nation, instrumental in expanding its membership across major U.S. cities.
So he's going all over the country.
Yeah, he's traveling. He's got this charisma, this powerful oratory that draws huge crowds,
Right.
particularly at Harlem's Temple No. 7.
I can only imagine. I mean, just reading these sources and getting a sense of his personality and the power of his words, it must have been just electrifying to be in that room.
Oh, absolutely.
Was he tapping into a specific kind of frustration that people were feeling at the time?
Absolutely. So while Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was advocating for nonviolent resistance and integration,
Right.
Malcolm X offered a different path, a more militant approach to achieving Black empowerment.
Okay.
And this resonated deeply with those who were frustrated by the slow pace of progress and felt that integration wasn't addressing the systemic nature of racism.
This clash between Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., two powerful figures with these vastly different approaches,
Right.
is something I think our listeners are probably fascinated by.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a bit on their contrasting ideologies?
So it was a stark contrast.
Yeah.
Dr. King championed nonviolent resistance and believed in achieving equality through integration.
Right.
Malcolm X, on the other hand, advocated for self-defense by any means necessary.
Wow.
He saw integration as an insufficient solution within a system designed to exploit Black Americans.
Right.
He believed that true liberation required a more radical approach, one that addressed the root causes of inequality.
He even went so far as to call the 1963 March on Washington
Right.
a pivotal moment in the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
A farce on Washington.
A farce on Washington.
What was behind that criticism?
So Malcolm X felt that the march, while symbolic, wouldn't lead to real change.
Okay.
He saw it as an attempt to appease white America,
Right.
while failing to address the deeper issues of systemic racism and economic inequality that were at the heart of the Black experience.
Right.
He was also very critical of Christianity, calling it a white man's religion,
Right.
questioning its relevance to the Black struggle.
It's clear that he wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo, even when it came to deeply held beliefs.
Right.
So we have Malcolm X at the height of his influence within the NOI, sparking debate, challenging conventional thinking.
Yeah.
What happens next in this captivating story? Did he continue on this path?
Just as he was reaching the peak of his influence within the Nation of Islam, something unexpected happened. In the early 1960s, Malcolm X begins to question the leadership of Elijah Muhammad, the NOI's leader.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Hold on, a twist in the story. What made him start to question Elijah Muhammad?
So it stemmed from allegations of moral failings within the NOI leadership. And this, coupled with his own kind of evolving worldview, led him to make a dramatic break from the organization that he'd so passionately represented.
Wow, that's a big turning point. So what happens to his vision for Black empowerment?
Right.
Does he retreat from the fight, or does he forge a new path?
So this break from the NOI marked a profound shift in Malcolm X's thinking.
Okay.
He embarks on a pilgrimage to Mecca.
Okay.
And that experience really profoundly changes him both personally and ideologically.
A pilgrimage to Mecca, that seems like an unexpected turn. How did that shift his perspective?
Well, imagine this Malcolm X, who had built his platform on the idea of racial separation,
Right.
arrives in Mecca and witnesses Muslims of all races worshiping together as equals. This experience really challenged his deeply held beliefs about race and integration.
Right.
He saw firsthand the universality of Islam, the brotherhood that transcended racial boundaries.
So that's incredible. It sounds like a true moment of awakening.
Yeah.
So how did this newfound perspective manifest when he returned to the United States?
He returns with a more inclusive vision,
Okay.
embracing the idea of Pan-Africanism and advocating for human rights for all, regardless of race or religion.
Wow.
He founds the Organization of Afro-American Unity, or the OAAU,
Okay.
which aimed to unite people of African descent worldwide and fight for their collective liberation.
So his focus shifts from separatism to a more global vision of human rights and solidarity.
Right.
That's quite a journey. But how did his ideas about achieving Black empowerment evolve?
Yeah, so he starts to emphasize self-reliance, economic independence, and political engagement as crucial elements in the fight for equality.
Okay.
He argues that Black communities need to build their own institutions, control their own economies, and have a voice in the political process.
Right.
He was really moving towards a more nuanced understanding of power, recognizing that true liberation required not just separation, but also self-determination and political agency.
It's fascinating how historians view Malcolm X's role in the civil rights movement.
Right.
It's not a simple story. It's not easily categorized.
Right.
What are some of the different interpretations of his impact?
So some historians, particularly social historians, emphasize Malcolm X as a voice for urban Black America.
Okay.
Someone who articulated the frustrations and aspirations of those living in northern ghettos,
Right.
who felt overlooked by the more Southern-focused civil rights campaigns.
That makes sense. He was speaking to a very specific experience,
Right.
one that wasn't always reflected in the mainstream narrative of the movement.
And then you have political historians who argue that Malcolm X's advocacy for Black nationalism, particularly during his time with the NOI,
Right.
was a vital part of the political discourse of the time.
Yeah.
It forced people to confront the realities of systemic racism
Right.
and question whether integration was truly a viable solution.
So even though it was a controversial stance, it pushed the conversation forward.
Absolutely.
And challenged the status quo.
His voice was a catalyst for critical thinking
Yeah.
about the complexities of race identity and equality in America.
And of course, you can't talk about Malcolm X's legacy without acknowledging the role of the Nation of Islam.
Right.
They played such a huge role in shaping his early thinking.
Right.
But what happened to the NOI after Malcolm X's departure and death?
So despite the split, the NOI under Louis Farrakhan's leadership continued to advocate for many of the same principles
Okay.
that Malcolm X championed in his early years: Black empowerment, economic self-sufficiency, and self-defense.
So while Malcolm X's vision evolved towards a more inclusive approach, the NOI maintained a more separatist stance.
Yeah, and their message continued to resonate, particularly among younger generations of African Americans
Okay.
who were seeking alternatives to mainstream religious and social structures.
It's incredible how both Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam, despite their differences, left such a lasting mark on the fight for Black liberation.
It speaks to the power of ideas,
Yeah.
how they can evolve, inspire, and sometimes even divide.
Right.
But ultimately, both Malcolm X and the NOI contributed to a broader conversation about what it means to be Black in America,
Right.
what true freedom and equality look like.
And that conversation continues today, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
We're still grappling with many of the same issues that Malcolm X addressed decades ago.
Yeah,
It makes you wonder, if Malcolm X were alive today,
right.
what would he say about our current social and political climate?
Yeah, it really does make you think, if he were here now, I mean, would he be encouraged by the progress we've made, or would he be, urging us to push further to challenge the systems that perpetuate inequality?
I think that's the million-dollar question,
Yeah.
And considering how outspoken he was about injustice,
Right.
I think he'd still be a powerful voice,
Pushing for meaningful change, urging us to dismantle those systems that hold people back.
Right.
And probably remind us that the fight for social justice never really ends.
Yeah.
It evolves.
One of the things that struck me while going through all these sources was how much Malcolm X's message continues to resonate today,
Right.
decades after his death.
Yeah.
His call for self-respect, economic empowerment, pride in one's heritage.
Mm-hmm.
These are themes that are just as relevant now as they were back then.
Absolutely. And those are ideas that transcend time and place.
Yeah.
They speak to the core of the human experience.
Right.
The desire for dignity, agency, and belonging.
Yeah.
And that's why his legacy continues to inspire people all over the world.
And, beyond the specific policies or strategies that he advocated for, it's his courage.
Yeah.
It's his willingness to speak truth to power that really stands out to me. He never backed down from challenging the status quo, even when it was dangerous.
And that's a key takeaway for all of us, isn't it?
Yeah.
He reminds us that real change requires not just ideas,
Right.
but also the courage to stand up for what we believe in,
Right.
to challenge those in power, to speak out against injustice.
And sometimes that means questioning your own beliefs
Absolutely.
and embracing a more inclusive vision, just like he did.
Precisely, his life was a journey of transformation,
Yeah.
a testament to the idea that we can always evolve our thinking, learn from new experiences, and broaden our understanding of the world.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the life and legacy of Malcolm X, what's the most important thing you think our listeners should take away from his story?
I would say it's the recognition that the struggle for justice is multifaceted and ongoing.
Okay.
Malcolm X's life story shows us that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to achieving equality.
Right.
It requires a combination of strategies, individual empowerment, collective action,
Yeah.
challenging systemic barriers, and constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
Well said. And just as importantly, his story reminds us that it's okay to evolve, to question our own beliefs, and to embrace a more inclusive vision of the world.
Absolutely. Malcolm X's life was a testament to the power of personal transformation and the importance of challenging the status quo, even when it's uncomfortable.
So to our listener, we hope this deep dive has left you with a renewed sense of curiosity about Malcolm X and the complexities of the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
His story is full of these valuable insights that can inform our understanding of the world today
Right.
and inspire us to continue the fight for justice and equality.
He left behind a legacy of courage, conviction, and a powerful reminder that the fight for a better world is a journey that continues.
Yes.
And it's one that we all have a role to play in.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another fascinating topic to explore. Until then, keep those minds curious.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.